Warren the fourth. My son is Warren the fifth, which is why we call him Quinn, because that means fifth son. So we have a long-standing tradition in our family. The firstborn son has to have a particular name, and so we carry that on. But I actually grew up here in the area. I grew up in Carrollton, and I graduated, though, after moving in high school from Frisco High School. So I'm from the area. But like many of y'all, I kind of grew up in church. But right around the state of being in middle school, my experience in church went from being my parents telling me to go to church to this weird season of trying to make my faith my own, or really, in my case, determine whether I actually believed the stories and was a Christian at all. So growing up, my mom and dad were great parents, loving parents. We were in and out of church. Many of y'all have a church background. You've done church here or other places. But Caleb, hold on real quick. But we would go to church. Mostly what I remembered in church, ironically, was the donuts, okay? The church that we went to would have a bunch of donuts. I knew some of the stories. I had a Bible, but my Bible would sit on my nightstand next to my bed to kind of look there and remind me, like, this is important, I need to read this. But in all honesty, it had a big layer of dust on top because I didn't ever move it or read it, okay? And so my Christian life was mostly just me going to church and telling people I believe that there is a God. Okay, that's kind of where I was. I didn't necessarily doubt that there was a God. I believed that there was something bigger than what I see on this earth. But that's kind of where it stopped for me. My actually coming to Christ wasn't until high school. And so when I moved up here to go to Frisco High School, I just got out of middle school. I really didn't care much about church until a group of friends from school invited me to come to church. And unlike church I'd ever been to, they actually had church specifically for our age. So like I would normally go with our parents, right? And here though, just like the church that I ended up going to, you have a middle school church, you have a high school church, and you have big church. With me so far? Okay, so I was invited to go to church by a bunch of friends, and I actually kept coming to church from that point on because I loved coming to church, and that's where all my friends were. They were nice, they cared for me, and I felt like I had a place to belong. And I want you to hear me that I hope that this is that place for you. That you know that this is a safe place for you to ask questions, for you to be vulnerable, and for you to have fun. So both sides of the coin, but we care here. So I started going to church, and then I somehow got invited to summer camp. Now, I had never been to summer camp before, and to be honest, a group of girls that I was kind of crushing on invited, they were going, and so in full honesty, I thought, well, this is a great time to try out camp, am I right? And so, I'm telling you, thank you. So, what I decided to do was go to camp like many of you guys and girls will end up doing while you're in middle school and while you're here at this church. You may have already been to camp, but camp was kind of a weird thing for me. I went to camp for kind of my own reasons, in a similar way that you guys can go to camp for your own reason, or we could come to church for maybe a different reason. But God had other plans for my life, specifically at that camp when I was 16 years old. So eyes up here. I remember on the third day, I was late going into the worship time, right? Raise your hand if you've been to camp. You know that like we take break from games and we go into like the big group time, right? Okay, hands down. And so I was late to that. I ran in with my shirt and my board shorts, okay? I was still like wet from pool time, okay? Because we went from games in there. And the guy up front, who had been our speaker for the whole week, that's what you do at camp, you have a speaker. He had said something very basic that I had probably heard, a story that I had heard probably hundreds of times. And it went something along the lines of this. God created all of us, and everything was perfect. But then, some reason, you and I chose to do things our own way instead of God's way. And we began to run away from God. And he began to tell us from the stage that even in our best efforts to be a good person and to earn God's forgiveness for our wrongdoing and sin, we always fall short. He began to tell me, and like I will tell y'all too, that there is nothing, no list of great things that you can ever do to earn God's forgiveness. You know that we are sinners because of our choice, but I was kind of, up until that point in my life, playing the game of, okay, I believe that there is a God. It's hard for me to, I know the stories. I know Noah. I know Jesus on the cross. I know Adam and Eve in the garden. Like, I know those stories, okay? But I didn't, if I could be honest with you, I didn't really see why I needed to go any further than that. I kind of stepped into being in middle school and high school okay with just knowing what I had learned in elementary, and I was okay. But for some reason, when that guy was speaking to me that day at summer camp, I realized I've been going about it all wrong. The trajectory that I was on was trying to make God happy with me. But the reality was, at least is what he was telling us, that I would never be able to do that. And so in an instant, he was on the stage, I was in my wet swim trunks, okay, sitting around all my friends and listening. I remember feeling, how on earth can I fix this? If I can't ever make God forgive me by helping old ladies across the street or serving in church, how could I ever make him happy with me? And then he began to tell me and all of us in there, just when we couldn't make it to God because of our good deeds, God actually came to us. And so, eyes up here, you know that Jesus who died on the cross, that is none other than the God who created the universe. Adam and Eve in the garden created. And then instead of us trying to make our way to him, he came to us. And he told us, eyes up here, that he actually lived the life that we should have lived. Perfect, without sin. He died the death that we deserved to die for our sin on the cross. And then here's the crazy thing that y'all remember from Easter, right? He then rose from the grave, defeating sin, death, all the things that happened because of our running away from God. And then he offers us forgiveness. And so I heard that, and I thought, this may be something that I want. And then he began to say that the forgiveness is there, it's free, but it's up to us to receive it, to take it, to actually trust that God has done what he has done, that we need his forgiveness, and to actually trust him for it. And it's actually at church camp at 16 that actually what they did was they had people who would like to learn more and like to trust Jesus walk down the aisle. So I walked down the aisle. I remember crying, sobbing. I didn't understand why, to be honest with you. I felt like everything up until that point in my life, as I looked at it at that moment, had been almost for nothing, and I was completely helpless. But it was as if I realized for some reason that I was in a big hole, and I had been stuck there for a while, and I hadn't understood that I was in the hole at all or why I was in there. But all of a sudden, a hand reached down from above the hole, and all I needed to do was grab hold and allow him to pull me out. In a similar way, that's exactly what I did that moment at church camp, in trusting Christ, grabbing onto the hand that was reaching out for me. And at 16 years old, I made a step in faith to put my trust in Jesus. And that's the moment that I became a Christian. Now, my story doesn't stop there, though, because at that point, I didn't know much. And to be honest, my life looked more like someone in the world than someone in the church. And so it took me several years after that of really wrestling with sin and misunderstanding and doubt. how can I trust these stories in the Bible? How am I to understand this? I had never read anything. No one ever told me how to pray, do whatever. And also, again, my life looked a lot like the world and less like someone from the church. And so after putting my faith in Jesus, I actually began to struggle and wrestle with many of the things that you guys will now begin to struggle with as middle school students.
Great.
Thank you. And so my life has continued through that, but here's why I tell you my story. Let me get your attention, because if you get nothing, I want you to get this. You being in here is for a reason. Not to go necessarily there, but to sit down and look up here, okay? You being in here is for a reason. Number one, the reason is that God has brought you here today for a reason that you don't understand, but know that behind the curtain, God brought you here. Number two, I need you to understand that the reason God has you here, eyes up here, now that you're in middle school, is no longer just for information. You have now, if you haven't realized this already, reached a point in your life to where you have heard, if you have any background in church, most of the stories. You know Noah, you know the animals, they go on the ark 2 by 2, whatever. You know Adam and Eve in the garden. You know all these stories, okay, that you've learned, and that's great. That stops now because you are now going to have to see how are you going to live out those stories. What does your life now look like if God has transformed you from the inside out? How should you then now start living differently? And so, as we move forward from today, here's the purpose of you being in the room. We're always going to have fun. We're always going to make sure that when you come in here, even if you're having a hard time outside of here, that this is safe, that you're loved and cared for. And we really try to make sure that you at least know some people in the room so that you don't feel lonely in what is quite a big church. Am I right?
Yeah.
We're also going to make sure that when you come in here, we're going to challenge some of the things that you believe in an effort to grow you in your faith. If you are a believer in here, if you have made that step in faith, that action to trust Jesus, to reach to the hand that has kind of reached in to grab you, so to speak. If you have put your faith in Jesus, what we're going to try to do is challenge you and begin to grow you in your faith, not so that you could learn more, but so that you can experience the more that God has for your life. Because right now, if you are a believer in here, I want you to understand that Jesus has, on a scale of 1 to 10, you've experienced 2 out of 10 as to what God has in store for you in your life. And we're here to start getting you to climb up the ranks so that you can see God move. Understand?
Yeah.
If you are not a believer in here, whether you are exploring Christianity, eyes up here, or whether you're unsure based off of how I described it or do describe it in the future, this is a safe place. This is a safe place for you to have doubts, concerns, ask really hard questions. Because what we want to do is show you the God behind the curtain. To show you the God who has saved our lives and who died to save yours. The point of middle school is more than just information. We want to see your lives transformed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. For many of you, you've already been in here for a couple of years. And so this is like, yeah, okay, great. Get off the stool. Okay? And for some of you, you're still jazzed up on donut sugar, okay? So you're tweaking hard, okay? But look at me. As the band comes up on the stage,
I want donuts.
I want you to understand that I have had a strange route to putting my faith in Christ. And a lot of your life will look different than other people's. It's okay if your story is different from the person you're sitting next to or that you're sitting in this room with. We want you to know that we care, that you're in a good place, and more specifically, eyes up here, that God has you in this chair right now for a specific reason. And we hope that through this year, we'll learn more about what that reason is. Okay? Let me pray, and then we're going to sing some songs, and we're going to do some other stuff. With me so far?
Yes, sir.
Y'all have done good, so let's pray. Okay? Eyes closed, head down, just so we don't get distracted. God, thank you so much for